is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. It's the 6th of February 2016. I'm your host Walter, and I do this like once a week for 2 hours at UCY.tv. Check it out. Also, if you want to go to more channels with media, you can go to reallibertymedia.com at the top. There you can see a whole list of stations like NASA TV, Choco Charlie, yay Chucky! And if you go to UCY.tv, there's a chat link there. Some of the people have already joined. Morning. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. in the Netherlands. Captain, how you doing? Jane, Joe, Possible Suspect, Vincent, and that's about it. Welcome everybody. Oh, 3 anons. Hello also. What you doing? I was thinking of continuing with the Plato, and I have some other things also in mind, like Operation Cyclone. This is from, I'll put that in the chat link so people can get there. Excellent tool, by the way. It's, click and scroll and type and get to know this tool. It's a good research tool. That one is open on Plato, I think. The other one is open on Operation Cyclone. I've been trying to find out a little bit about that. Operation Cyclone, and the first thing I did was trying to find some declassified documents from some government website, but I can't seem to find any. So if you've got a .gov site link or something about Operation Cyclone, anybody, please go to UCY.tv, click on the chat link and paste it there. The thing is that it caught my attention the first time when Hillary Clinton was talking about it. She didn't mention Operation Cyclone literally, but she was talking about how the United States helped the Mujahideen fight the Russians, and she was talking about how the United States created their own problem. And so I do not suggest taking her as a legitimate source of information. However, we should, see if this is true or not. And so Operation Cyclone is apparently what she was talking about. And that's one thing I would like to go into. I don't know how much time we still have left on Plato, which we are now at the trial of Socrates. If you want to join in, you can do so by contacting me via Skype at Solvinur, Solvinur, and I'll drag you in to the radio to talk about anything you like. Alright. The trial of Socrates is, this is from Wikipedia, central unifying event of the great Platonic dialogues. Because of this, Plato's Apology is perhaps the most often read of the dialogues. In the Apology, Socrates tries to dismiss rumors that he is a sophist. Right, so we could click that, sophist, but let's do that. Why not? People should know what a sophist is, right? Let's see if this is this Wikipedia. Let's see if we agree with this or not. Sophist redirects for the work of Plato, blah blah blah. Sophism is a method of teaching in ancient Greece. That's not really what springs to my mind at first. Sophists were a category of teachers who specialized using the techniques of philosophy and rhetoric for the purpose of teaching excellence or virtue. Alright, so the complaint against the sophists is that they use the techniques in rhetoric, right? Remember that rhetoric is the third part of the trivium, and that it consists of the first two. The three actually are one, right? So there's the grammar and logic is in there. When they're talking about the techniques of rhetoric, they are talking about techniques of influencing people's minds by leaving out certain grammar, by making fallacies in the rhetoric, in the logic, and those two combined bringing up a certain rhetoric, which is more about winning the argument than via fallacies, than getting at the truth of things, right? So, what else does it say? The practice of changing money for education and providing wisdom only to those who could pay led to the condemnation made by Socrates. Though Plato in his dialogues, as well as Xenophon and Memorabilia something, though works such as these, sophists were portrayed as specious or deceptive. Alright, so deceptive comes close, right? Hence the modern meaning of the term. Modern meaning of the term, and the only thing I can come up with is sophisticated, and in Dutch that word doesn't have a negative sound. Alright, so back to the main article. Did I click away the wrong thing now? No. Yes. I did. Where were we? I'm sorry about this, guys. We lost it. Blah, blah. Here. Alright, so Socrates tries to dismiss rumors that he is a sophist and defends himself against charges of disbelief in the gods and corruption of the young. Socrates insists that long-standing slander will be the real cause of his demise, and says the legal charges are essentially false. Socrates famously denies being wise and explains how his life as a philosopher was launched by the oracle at Delphi. He says that his quest to resolve the riddle of the oracle puts him at odds with his fellow man, and that this is the reason he has been mistaken for a menace to the city-states of Athens. Hold on, guys. Cigarette. If Plato's important dialogues do not refer to Socrates' execution explicitly, they allude to it, or use characters or themes that play a part in it. 5 dialogues foreshadow the trial. In the Theaetetus and the Euthyphro, Socrates tells people that he is about to face corruption charges. In the Meno, one of the men who brings legal charges against Socrates, Anytus warns him about the trouble he may get into if he does not stop criticizing important people. In the Gorgias, Socrates says that his trial will be like a doctor prosecuted by a cook who asks a jury of children to choose between the doctor's bitter medicine and the cook's tasty treats. In the Republic, Socrates explains why an enlightened man, presumably himself, will stumble in a courtroom situation. The Apology is Socrates' defense speech, and in the Crito and Phaedo take place in prison after the conviction. In the Protagoras, Socrates is the guest of the home of Callias, son of Hipponicus, a man whom Socrates disparages in the Apology as having wasted a great amount of money on sophists' fees. Alright, so much for that heading. Next is unity and diversity of the dialogues. 2 other important dialogues, the Symposium and the Phaedrus, are linked to the main storyline by characters. In the Apology, Socrates says Aristophanes slandered him in a comic play and blames him for causing his bad reputation and ultimately his death. In the Symposium, the 2 of them are drinking together with other friends. The character Phaedrus is linked to the main storyline by character. Phaedrus is also participant in the Symposium and the Protagoras, and by theme, the philosopher as divine emissary, etc. The Protagoras is also strongly linked to the Symposium by characters. All of the formal speakers at the Symposium, with the exception of Aristophanes, are present at the home of Callias, something like that, in that dialogue. Charmides and his guardian Critias are present for the discussion in the Protagoras. Examples of characters crossing between dialogues can be further multiplied. The Protagoras contains the largest gathering of Socratic associates. No, Jane, it's not Dutch cigarettes, it's the rolling paper that makes it go out. Where were we, by the way? In the dialogues, Plato is most celebrated and admired for. Socrates is concerned with human and political virtue, has a distinctive personality, and friends and enemies who travel with him from dialogue to dialogue. This is not to say that Socrates is consistent. A man who is his friend in one dialogue may be an adversary or subject of his mockery in another. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would call that inconsistent. I mean, these are just, as far as as I can tell, anyway. I'm gonna put that. If you see them as teachers, you could envision them giving different points of view. Yeah. What is inconsistent about that? You know? Yeah, absolutely. Dutch cigarettes are expensive. Yeah. But besides that, the cigarettes that are available are too light. I've got Ruba Heavy, as they call it in Dutch, or Ruba Zwaar. It's tobacco with a lot of effective material, like nicotine, and tar, and all the rest of the chemicals that they put in there to make the nicotine work better, so that you keep buying the damn stuff. Yeah. So now you know, Dan, which tobacco. Alright. And it's damn expensive. It's more than twice expensive as it was 20 years ago or so. Anyway, Socrates praises the wisdom of Euthyphro many times in the Cratylus, but makes him look like a fool in the Euthyphro. He disparages sophists generally, and Prodicus specifically in the Apology, whom he also slyly jabs in the Cratylus for charging the hefty fee of 50 drachmas for a course on language and grammar. However, Socrates tells Theaetetus in his namesake dialogue that he admires Prodicus and has directed many pupils to him. Socrates' ideas are also not consistent within or between or among dialogues. Alright, so the next is Platonic scholarship. Although their popularity has fluctuated over the years, the works of Plato have never been without readers since the time they were written. Plato's thought is often compared with that of his most famous student Aristotle, whose reputation during the Western Middle Ages so completely eclipsed that of Plato that the scholastic philosophers refer to Aristotle as the philosopher. However, in the Byzantine Empire, the study of Plato continued. The only Platonic work known to Western scholarship was Timaeus, until translations were made at a time post the fall of Constantinople, which occurred during 1453. George Gemistos Platon brought Plato's original writings from Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, in the century of its fall. It is believed that Platon passed a copy of the dialogues to Cosimo de' Medici when in 1438 the Council of Ferrara called to unify the Greek and Latin churches, was adjourned to Florence, where Platon then lectured on the relation and differences of Plato and Aristotle, and fired Cosimo with his enthusiasm. Cosimo would supply Marsilio Ficino with Plato's text for translation to Latin. During the early Islamic era, Persian and Arab scholars translated much of Plato into Arabic and wrote commentaries and interpretations on Plato's, Aristotle's, and other Platonist philosophers' works. Many of these comments on Plato were translated from Arabic into Latin. I thought they came from there, and such as influenced medieval scholastic philosophers. During the Renaissance, with the general resurgence of interest in classical civilizations, knowledge of Plato's philosophy would become widespread, again in the West. Many of the greatest early modern scientists and artists who broke with the scholasticism and fostered by following the Renaissance with the support of Plato-inspired Lorenzo, grandson of Cosimo, saw Plato's philosophy as the basis for progress in the arts and sciences. His political views, too, were well received. The vision of wise philosopher kings of the Republic matched the views set out in works such as Machiavelli's The Prince. More problematic was Plato's belief in metempsychosis, that's in reincarnation, transmigration of the soul, as well as the ethical views or polyamory and euthanasia in particular, which did not match those of Christianity. It was Platon's student Bessarion who reconciled Plato with Christian theology. Well, there were more that tried, arguing that Plato's views were only ideals, unattainable due to the fall of man. By the 19th century, Plato's reputation was restored, and at least on par with Aristotle's. Notable Western philosophers have continued to draw upon Plato's work since that time. Yeah. Guess I should say something about that. Note, it says here, notable Western philosophers have continued to draw upon Plato's work since that time. What do they mean here? Even current ones? By the 19th century, right, it says here, by the 19th century, Plato's reputation was restored. And then notable Western philosophers, I'm assuming that's like after the 19th century or in the 19th century. Alright, they should have seen it coming by then anyway. It's I'm trying to find a way to introduce this idea that I got. It has to do with technology. And in the days of Plato, technology was not much around. And nowadays, however, there's no way we could envision our life without technology. And so I suggest that influences the way in which one should look at philosophy, right? If philosophy, as I claim, has everything to do with truth, then it also has to do with the surroundings, the environment that you as a living being are moving through, are surrounded by, quote unquote, the world that you live in, right? And because as far as we know in history, can be definitely proven, taking myths as myths and not as literal fact, this is the most technologically sophisticated society that we've had so far. Apparently, if you want to believe the mainstream, right? There might be some doubt in my mind regarding that claim, but it isn't much. The doubt isn't based on real evidence, like Vimana or something. I don't regard those tales as evidence. It's not enough. Right? So, I think that should be incorporated somehow into the, what is it, metaphysics, I guess? Right? In Plato's day, there was not this type of technology now that I can talk to you in the United States and that you can instantly hear me. Right? That would be like magic in those days. Right? So, but because technology has so invaded the way of human life and is also used as a weapon against us. I'm not just talking about the technology used to create weapons. I'm talking about technology in itself. It is, like any knowledge, neutral in nature, but what you do with it can be very bad, right? Can be very evil. All right, enough about that. Plato. Well, my point was that philosophers should make their own branches and not look 2,000 years ago. I mean, you might get some basic ideas, maybe, right? Pick out the basic ideas, like axioms. If they used axioms 2,000 years ago, you look at them and you see the truth of it, then there's no problem with using them. But don't make a whole study of it. That seems to me like a wasted time. It seems to me that as a philosopher, you should be making up your own. And that goes for everybody, by the way, whether you're a philosopher or not. Let's say whether you call yourself a philosopher or not. Because I think all humans by nature are. Alright, so Plato's influence has been especially strong in mathematics and the sciences. Oh. Huh, really? I would give that to Aristotle. Yes, the science part, since he was the one that said there's nothing wrong with your senses. And later that became measure and number, remember, with Descartes? No. He helped to distinguish between the pure and applied mathematics by widening the gap between arithmetic, now called number theory, and logistic, now called arithmetic. Right, so I have no clue what that is about, unfortunately. He regarded logistic as appropriate for businessmen and men of war, who must learn the art of numbers or he will not know how to array his troops, all right, while arithmetic was appropriate for philosophers because he has to arise out of the sea of change and lay hold of true being. Right, so now that goes a bit too far for me. I would say that what he then means, apparently, with arithmetic can be seen in the creation of nature, like, for instance, a Fibonacci sequence or a Jacob's sequence. Or in certain ratios between orbits planets and the sun, and orbits planets and other orbits planets and moons and things like that. There's arithmetic in that, and the more you look at that, it looks like arithmetic is a property of nature, right? So you could say, well, okay, we got one clue here about reality, but to call that then to lay hold of true being, that goes a bit too far, right? That's saying, well, I know what true being is. I would say that goes way too far. Continuing, Plato's resurgence further inspired some of the greatest advances in logic, since Aristotle, primarily through Gottlob Frege, that one is nice, Gottlob Frege, let's open that one in a new, because that's also new for me, and I should have researched that earlier, because it's like the third time I encountered his name now. He seems to have done something that changed things. Alright, so Plato's resurgence further inspired some of the greatest advances in logic. Right? Gottlob Frege has something to say about that. Since Aristotle, primarily through Gottlob Frege and his followers Kurt Gödel, which reminds me of a book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, linking, well, I guess you would call it arithmetic here, and music, and visual things from Bach, linking them to from Escher, linking them together. Right. So, and his followers Kurt Gödel, Alonzo Church, and Alfred Tarski. Albert Einstein suggested that the scientists who take philosophy seriously would have to avoid systemization and take on many different roles, and possibly appear as a Platonist or a Pythagorean, in that such a one would have the viewpoint of logical simplicity as an indispensable and effective tool of his research. Many recent philosophers have diverged from what some would describe as the ontological models. That's metaphysical. What's the nature of reality? Many recent philosophers have diverged from what some would describe as the ontological models and moral ideals, right? Like ethics, a third branch, characteristic of traditional Platonism. A number of these postmodern philosophers have thus appeared to disparage Platonism from more or less informed perspectives. Friedrich Nietzsche notoriously attacked Plato's idea of the good itself, along with many fundamentals of Christian morality. Well, I guess I'm going to have to agree with Nietzsche here, which he interpreted as Platonism for the masses. Platonism for the masses. Yeah. Like I said before, right, when we were discussing Plato, I said that in his day, this knowledge was not given to the masses, right? Because Plato describes, like the Bhagavad Gita also, by the way, where a lot of it, and Srimad Bhagavatam, where a lot of his ideas come from, it describes human nature. And thus it describes how to control human nature. That's why it's not meant for the masses. So, I'm a bit suspicious about why this is all out in the open now. Also because of the resurgence via the Renaissance. There's no way to know, at least for me, because I don't speak languages that are required, what has happened. Is it the same, or have things changed? Are these the correct translations? Could those translations in the Renaissance have been influenced in any way? I don't know. I don't speak the original languages, don't have the original texts. It's the same problem with the Indian mythologies, like the Bhagavad Gita. There's so many translations of it, you don't know which one is the correct one. You'd have to learn Sanskrit and look at the original texts. So Nietzsche says it's Platonism for the masses in one of his most important works, Beyond Good and Evil. That's in 1886. Martin Heidegger argued against Plato's alleged obfuscation of being in his incomplete tome, Being and Time, 1927. And the philosopher of science Karl Popper argued in The Open Society and Its Enemies, interesting title, 1945, that Plato's alleged proposal for an utopian political regime in the Republic was prototypically totalitarian. Yes, of course it is. Yeah. And that may be interesting to look into. Karl Popper. The Open Society and Its Enemies. The political philosopher and professor Leo Strauss is also considered by some as the prime thinker involved in the recovery of Platonic thought in its more political and less metaphysical form. Strauss's political approach was in part inspired by the appropriation of Plato and Aristotle by medieval Jewish and Islamic political philosophers, especially Maimonides and Al-Farabi, as opposed to the Christian metaphysical tradition that developed from Neoplatonism. Yeah. Deeply influenced by Nietzsche and Heidegger, Strauss nonetheless rejects their condemnation of Plato and looks to the dialogues for a solution to what all three latter-day thinkers acknowledge as the crisis of the West. Latter-day thinkers, what the heck is that? Is that something like the end of the world is coming or something? All three latter-day thinkers? What? I'm just gonna copy that and put that into Google to see what that is, guys. Paste. All three latter-day thinkers. The one that comes back is the one that I'm reading from. Any of you guys know what they mean with that? Because direct Google search doesn't seem to have any effect. Maybe people in the chat know what that is about. Alright, where were we? Hold on. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Clickety click. Latter-day Saints. Mormons. Somebody says in the chat room, thank you, Brewmaster. Alright. That was the end of that thing. Textual sources in history is next. Some 250 known manuscripts. Scribe. Of Plato survive. 250. The texts of Plato as received today apparently represent the complete written philosophical work of Plato and generally good by the standards of textual criticism. No clue what that is, one could check it if you want to. No modern edition of Plato in the original Greek represents a single source, but rather it is reconstructed from multiple sources which are compared with each other. Alright. These sources are medieval manuscripts written on vellum, mainly from the 9th or 13th century. Well, that's just a piece of paper, guys, vellum. 9th to 13th century AD Byzantium. Papyri, sounds like paper, mainly from the late Antique in Egypt and from the independent testimonia of other authors who quote various segments of the work. Independent testimonia of other authors? Who? Which come from a variety of sources. The text as presented is usually not much different from what appears in the Byzantine manuscripts, and papyri and testimonia just confirm the manuscript tradition. Right, so what did they do? Did they find like texts from 3 different areas and they seem to say the same thing, or what? Did they just grab some text together and say, well, these look like to be in context, so let's put them together? I'm not quite sure what they mean here. In some editions, however, the readings in the papyra or testimonia are favored in some places by editing critic of the text. Reviewing editions of papyra for the Republic in 1987, Slings suggest that the use of papyra is hampered due to some poor editing practices. In the 1st century AD, Thrasyllus of Mendes had compiled and published the works of Plato in the original Greek. Clickety click. Hold on, guys. Both genuine and spurious, while it has not survived the present day. All the extant medieval Greek manuscripts are based on his edition. The oldest surviving complete manuscript from many of the dialogues is the Clark Plato Codex Oxynemsius, something like that. which was written in Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, in 895 and acquired by Oxford University in 1809. The Clark is given the Siculum B in modern edition. B contains the first 6 tetralogies, talks with more than 1, 2, 3 tetra, 5, right? I don't know. And is described internally as being written by John the Calligrapher on behalf of Aretas of Caesarea. It appears to have undergone corrections by Aretas himself. For the last 2 tetralogies and the Apocrypha, the oldest surviving complete manuscript is Codex Parisinus Gracius 1807, designed A, which was written nearly contemporaneously to B, circa 900 AD. It must be a copy of the edition edited by Patriarch Photios, teacher of Aretas. A probably had initial volume containing the first 7 tetralogies, which is now lost, but of which a copy was made. Codex Venetus, append, class 4, 1, blah de blah. This is not interesting. During the early Renaissance, the Greek language and, along with it, Plato's text were reintroduced to Western Europe by Byzantine scholars. In September or October of 1484, Filippo Valori and Francesco Berlingueri printed 1025 copies of Ficino's translation using the printing press at the Dominican convent as Jacopo di Ripoli. Cosimo had been influenced towards studying Plato by many Byzantine Platonists in Florence during his day, including George Gemistus Platon. Oh, so many names I've never heard of. Modern editions. The Oxford Classical Texts, one more thing that one could click if you want to go into it, offers the current standard complete Greek text of Plato's complete works, in 5 volumes edited by John Burnet. Its first edition was published 1900 to 1907 and is still available from the publisher, having last been printed in 1993. The second edition is still in progress, with only the first volume printed in 1995 and the Republic printed in 2003 available. The Cambridge Greek and Latin Texts and Cambridge Classical Text and Commentary series includes Greek editions of the Protagoras, Symposium, Phaedrus, Alcibiades, and Cleitophon, with English philological, literary, to an extent, philosophical commentary. Right. One thing that springs to mind now is how language works. And the language that we have today is so linked to the way our society works that a translation from 2,000 years ago may not be the same, those words have different meanings in those days. The language that we use today can probably not be fairly compared to the languages that were in use 2,000, 2,500 years ago. I would almost compare it to operating systems. Right? There's old ones and there's very new ones. Like, what was it? Windows 3. Right? So that's another reason why philosophers today should make philosophy for today. The past is, in that sense, not that interesting. One distinguished edition of the Greek text is E.R. Dodd's of the Gorgias, which includes extensive English commentary. The modern standard complete English edition is the 1997 Hackett Plato, Complete Works, edited by John M. Cooper. Alright, so it's more, that's about it, guys. Alright, so what's this Gottlieb Frege? Gottlieb Frege. I'll put that in the chat. This is probably something that's way too difficult, since logic is very difficult. It's very hard. Gottlieb Frege is a German, 8th November 1848, 26 July 1925, was a German philosopher, logician and mathematician. He is considered to be one of the founders of modern logic and made major contributions to the foundation of mathematics. See how philosophy ties into science. He is generally considered to be the ladder of analytic philosophy for his writings on the philosophy of language and mathematics. The philosophy of language, interesting. While he was mainly ignored by the intellectual world when he published his writings. Right? My philosophy on language is language is the prison within which we can express ourselves. Giuseppe Bueno and Bertrand Russell introduced his works to later generations of logicians and philosophers. Right, so Bertrand Russell is another interesting figure. If I'm not mistaken, he also spoke out against totalitarianism, but I'm not sure. Bertrand Russell, British philosopher, logician, mathematician, historian, writer, social critic, and political activist. At various points in his life is considered himself a liberal, a socialist, and a pacifist. Alright. So, that's odd. But he also admitted that he had never been of these in any profound sense. Right? So he does distance himself a little from politics, which he should, as a philosopher, should be a no-no, actually. He was born in Monmouthshire into one of the most prominent aristocratic families in Britain. So that's, you hear that a lot, right? Last time we found that out about Plato. Now Bertrand Russell comes from one of the most prominent aristocratic families. And in this case, Britain. Where a lot of those seem to come from. In the early 20th century, Russell led the British revolt against idealism. He is considered one of the founders of analytic philosophy. No clue what that is. Along with his predecessor Gottlieb Frege, colleague G.E. Moore, and his protege Ludwig Wittgenstein. That's a name we've heard before. He is widely held to be one of the 20th century primary logicians. With Albert North Whitehead, he wrote Principia Mathematica, an attempt to create a logical basis for mathematics. A logical basis for mathematics? Euclid comes to mind, but why would you have a logical basis for mathematics? I don't understand. We created numbers, right? And we figured out what you can do with numbers. And it seems to work. I understand there is a link between logic and mathematics, right? But not sure what a logical basis is. His philosophical essay on denoting has been considered a paradigm of philosophy. His work has a considerable influence on logic. A considerable influence on logic? Right. So, I don't see how that can be. Yeah. Because logic is something that is innate to humans, right? It's innate to every human is born with it. So he cannot have a considerable influence on how people are born. That's impossible. Mathematics, set theory, linguistics. He has an influence on linguistics. Artificial intelligence, cognitive science, computer science. Baba. Type theory, that's related to the computer science apparently, the type theory and type system. And philosophy, especially the philosophy of language. Epistemology and metaphysics. Alright, see, that's interesting. I'd have to know what he actually says about philosophy of language, epistemology and metaphysics, this Mr. Bertrand Russell, before I can decide whether to agree with him or not. Russell was a prominent anti-war activist. Okay, well, that's good. He championed anti-imperialism, see? And went to prison for his pacifism during World War I. Later, he campaigned against Adolf Hitler, then criticized Stalin's totalitarianism, attacked the involvement of the United States in the Vietnam War. Alright, I'm starting to like this guy, actually. Yeah. So far, so good, huh? And was an outspoken proponent of nuclear disarmament. In 1950, Russell was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in recognizing of his varied and significant writings in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. Alright, so what do we do, guys? Do we continue with this from Bertrand Russell, or shall we go to, for the last hour? Yes, we will do that for the last hour. We will see what we can find out about this Operation Cyclone, right? So, 2 minutes to the hour. It's fantastic when there's no ads breaking in, right? Da-da-da. You can call in if you like. You can join the radio. What you gotta do is have Skype. And contact me, Solvinur, Solvinur. And I'll get you on air. You can talk about anything you like. And the thing that I had open is Operation Cyclone, and I was wondering if anybody had like a .gov link to some kind of declassification of this Operation Cyclone. I tried to find it. There is one, but it's not the same one. This is a later one. I believe this one was from 1990 or something. This Operation Cyclone is, what is it, 1979, I think. We will see to it when we get into this article here. I mentioned Hillary talking about this, right? And not taking her as a reliable source. Therefore, I went to look for declassified documents from the government about Operation Cyclone, but I can't find any. So, if you do find those, please put them in the chat room at juicy.tv. You can find the chat link. There's a couple of people there still. Captain, Dan, Earth, Defense, Hopper, Jane, Joe, Matty, welcome, buddy. Possible suspect. You should call in someday. Tomato, what's up? Vincent. Foya.gov. Oh, really, Grimner? Well, that would be awesome, right? Operation Cyclone, January. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah, but this says not. All right, this is the one I also found. I'll type it into chat. I found that Grimmer, but this is the Operation Cyclone I am looking for. Now I got to paste that Operation Cyclone. This one here. Copy that and put that in the chat room. Where is it? Where is the freaking chat room? Here it is. There. Grimmer. If you see that Operation Cyclone there, and I was just checking that note too, by the way, but that's why the note is there in the link. But that's a totally different subject. So that's the one that I was looking for. Operation Cyclone, apparently here it says, was the code name for United States Central Intelligence Agency program to arm and finance the Afghan Mujahideen prior to and during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Right? So that has nothing to do with this 1945 Operation Cyclone. Approved for release July 2000, but this is about German uniforms and other stuff. So that's not the one. So this is all actually still looking for primary sources. I also tried to find some in the links that supposedly are footnotes, which should give you the primary sources, but that doesn't help me much in confirming this story. And I'm assuming that this is correct, because it seems to be accepted as real by many people in the so-called truth community, whatever you want to call it, right? Operation Cyclone was the code name for the CIA program to arm and finance the Afghan Mujahideen prior to and during the Soviet war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Alright, so one thing I would refer you to also is and I will put that in the chat link as well. No, it's not this one. Is a now I need to find it. This one. Copy that. Is a Peace Revolution episode 91, and I'll paste that in the link also. Because here you can hear from different. That's nice, right? Here you can hear from different named independent journalists the kind of contradictions, like this French independent filmmaker that went there, and he mentioned that the resistance was very poorly armed with pre-World War I weapons. 1 in 50 resistance people had a Kalashnikov, right? And then a little bit later he says that the weapons that the resistance people had were improved, but that was only because the people defected from the Afghan army to the rebels. And that's what gave them the weapons. And there it continues. He's also talking about this terrible weapon that the Soviets apparently had, about this helicopter who could fly across space at 300 kilometers per hour and had devastating effects. It also talks about how the Russians deliberately bombed the hospitals, leaving the trees around it intact, right? So things like that. So, but let's continue with the presentation from Operation Cyclone. The program leaned heavily towards supporting militant Islamic groups that were favored by the regime of Muhammad Zia al-Haq in neighboring Pakistan. All right. Also, many 9/11 researchers see a link between this Operation Cyclone and 9/11. Rather than other, less ideological Afghan resistant groups that had also been fighting the Marxist-oriented Democratic Republic of Afghanistan regime since before the Soviet intervention. Right? I think the Soviet intervened in 1978. Also from the podcast Revolution number 91. Check it out. It's very well made, again, by the people from tragedyandhope.com. Welcome, Lumperdeed. How you doing, buddy? Where were we? Operation Cyclone was one of the longest and most expensive covert CIA operations ever undertaken. Right? And so you wanna, if you want to have a source for that, it goes back to a Time magazine article, The Oily Americans. Right? I'm gonna open that in a new, and then you get what's supposed to be 2, right? Yes. Time magazine. And if you open that, you get a Time magazine. This thing, right? This does not lead to anything that could be considered. The Oily Americans. The Oily Americans. So they're basing that on this. Right? And I was looking, I may have found this before and was looking for links to primary sources. But anyway, this is a Time article. And this is page I should start at page 1, of course. And it says here, for more than half a century, American foreign policy dealings with oil has typically been manipulative and misguided. So this is an article about oil, and probably it has some reference there back to Operation Cyclone about being one of the longest and most expensive covert CIA operations ever undertaken. See, longest and most expensive. That's also what comes up in an interview at Peace Revolution 91 after you hear about those independent filmmakers, is this guy, I don't remember his name, who supposedly worked for the CIA. He's also saying that billions went to Afghanistan. How do we take any of these people's words for truth? I just don't know. Operation Cyclone, yeah, that's what I said, most expensive, blah, blah, blah. Funding began with 20 to 30 million per year in 1918 and rose to 630 million per year in 1987. And that's also apparently from a book, Peter, Holy Wars, Inc., page 68. And where does he get this information from? Funding continued after 1989 as the Mujahideen battled the forces of Mohammed Naibullah or somethings, PDPA, that's probably a political party, during the civil war in Afghanistan, 1989-1992. Background. In April 1978, the Communist People Democratic Party of Afghanistan, that's the PDPA, seized power in Afghanistan in the Sour Revolution. Within months, opponents of the Communist Party launched an uprising in eastern Afghanistan that quickly expanded into a civil war waged by Islamist guerrilla Mujahideen against government forces countrywide. Alright, so this also... Well, it's either contradictory or not, but the story that I've been told, or that goes around, is that the United States provoked an intervention of the Russians into Afghanistan. The Pakistani government that under General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq since July 1977 had started the policy of aggressive Islamization, provided these rebels with covert training centers, while the Soviet Union sent thousands of military advisors to support the PDPA government. Meanwhile, increasing friction between the competing factions of the PDPA, the dominant Khalik and the more moderate Parcham, resulted in the dismissal of Parchami cabinet members and the arrest of Parchami military officers under the pretext of a Paraghmi coup. Right. Oh, that's good. A better take, Grimmer, thank you very much. A better take on the movie and real history of Cyclone. Copy, open that. Let's see what we get here. Special report. Hollywood's dangerous Afghan illusion. A newly discovered document undercuts a key storyline of the anti-Soviet Afghan war in 1980s, that it was Charlie Wilson's war. A note inside Ronald Reagan's White House targeted the Texas Democrat as someone to bring into circle as discrete Hill connection, Robert Perry reports. Let's see what this is about, Grim. The hand, let's see. Yeah, that's right. This also comes back in Peace Revolution 91, episode 91. I'm picking up somewhere in the middle of the story. I found a document in the files of the former CIA propaganda chief Walter Raymond Jr., who in the 1980s oversaw the selling of U.S. interventions in Central America and Afghanistan from his office at the National Security Council. The handwritten note to Raymond appears to be initiated by the then National Security Advisor, Robert McFarlane, and instructs Raymond to recruit Wilson into Reagan's administration effort to drum up more Afghan war money for the fiscal 1985 budget. The note reads, Walt, go to Charlie Wilson. Seek to bring him into circle as discrete Hill connection. He can be very helpful in getting money. M. The notation may have been used the wrong adjective, possibly intending discrete, meaning circumspect and suggesting a secretive role, not discrete, meaning separate and distinct. Blah, 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 blah. What else is this about? Resigned. Alright. Raping Russians, also a thing that comes back in that Peace Revolution thingy. The real history. Here's what the history actually shows. In 1988, I think, Gorbachev promised to remove Soviet troops from Afghanistan and sought a negotiated settlement. He hoped for a unity government that would include elements of Afghan President Nabiullah's Soviet-backed regime in Kabul and the CIA-backed Islamic fundamentalist rebels. Alright. Gates, who in 1988 was deputy CIA director, opposed Gorbachev's plan, disbelieving that the Soviets would really depart and insisting that, if they did, the CIA's Mujahideen could quickly defeat Najibullah's army. Right, I wish Michael Vale was here. He's much better at this geopolitics than I am. I don't know how many people have ever heard of Michael Vale, but I asked him once about this geopolitics, and I said to him, well, look, it looks like national politics is corrupt and it's all a puppet show, and I suspect that it's the same for geopolitics. And I asked him if he would agree, and he says yes. So, you gotta take that in mind also when you're looking at the situation. It's still a mess up there, isn't it? Inside the Reagan administration, Gates' judgment was opposed by State Department analysts who foresaw a drawn-out struggle. Deputy Secretary of State John Whitehead and the Department Intelligence Steve Morton Abramovich warned that Nabiullah's army might hold on longer than the CIA expected. But Gates prevailed in the policy debates, pushing the CIA's faith in its Mujahideen clients and expecting a rapid Najibullah collapse if the Soviets left. In the memoir, Gates recalled briefing Secretary of State George Shultz and his senior aides on the CIA's predications prior to Shultz's flying to Moscow in February 1988. Yeah, it is more of a mess than ever, right? And I got to wonder, this is a country that's full of mountains. If you're gonna fight a war, can you find some better place? Historically, mountains are known to be very hard to conquer, right? However, the new administration of George H.W. Bush, with Gates moving from the CIA to the White House as Deputy National Security Advisor, rebuffed Gorbachev and chose to continue U.S. covert support for the Mujahideen, which was being funneled primarily through Pakistan Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, the ISI, which you will come across when you start researching 9/11. All the time, I was Newsweek national security correspondent and asked my CIA contacts why the US government didn't just collect its winnings from the Soviet withdrawal and agree to some kind of national unity government in Kabul that could end the war and bring some stability to the country. One of the CIA hardliners responded to my question with disgust. We want to see Najibullah strung up by a light pole, he snarled. Back in Afghanistan, Najibullah's regime defied the CIA's expectations of a rapid collapse, using Soviet weapons and advisors to beat back a Mujahideen offensive in 1990. As Najibullah hung on, the war, the violence and disorder continued. Gates finally recognized that this CIA analysis had been wrong. In his memoir he wrote, "As it turned out, Whitehead and Abramovich were right in their warning that Najibullah's regime might not fall quickly." Gates' memoir also acknowledges that the United States government did not abandon Afghanistan immediately after the Soviet departure. Najibullah would remain in power for another 3 years after the Soviet pullout, as the United States and the USSR continued to aid their respective sides. Gates wrote, "Indeed, Moscow's and Washington's supplies continued to flow until several months after the Soviet Union collapsed in the summer of 1991, according to Gates." Alright, thank you, Grimmer, from reallibertymedia.com. Back to where we were. Where were we? I think here. 1987, the Communist People Democratic Party seized power in Afghanistan. This is sour revolution, we just did this, but within months, opponents of the communist government launched an uprising in eastern Afghanistan. Opponents of the communist government. Well, that seems kind of strange, right? Who would these opponents of a communist government be? It seems almost impossible, with the idea that I have of Afghanistan being a Muslim country. In fact, the whole country derives, and the whole people derive their identity from the Islam. And Islam does not compute with communist. In fact, if you're a communist, you're anti-Islam. So, who are these people? Those opponents of communist government launched an uprising in eastern Afghanistan that quickly expanded into a civil war. What's going on here? waged by Islamist guerrilla mujahideen against government forces countrywide. Alright, so apparently those government forces are communist. PDPA. The Pakistan government, that under General Muhammad Zia-ul Haq since July 1977, had started the policy of aggressive Islamization, provided the rebels with covert training centers. Covert training centers. Well, they must have been underground then, right? Satellites can see anything. Even in those days they could see things, right? Maybe not as clearly as today, but with the Soviet Union sent thousands of military advisors to support the PDPA government. Meanwhile, increasing friction between the competing factions of the PDPA, the dominant Kalik and the more moderate Parcham, resulted in the dismissal of Parchami cabinet members and the arrest of Parchami military officers under the pretext of a Parchami coup. Right. Hold on, guys. By mid-1979, the United States had started a covert program to finance the Mujahideen. And this is also from a book, apparently. Mayor Jogomon 2004, America's Afghanistan War, The Success That Failed, it's called, Gaian Books. Alright, so I don't know if there's in that book any primary sources, but so far nothing. President Carter's National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was later quoted as saying that the goal of the program was to induce a Soviet military invention. See? What I said earlier. So did those two things coincide? But later claimed that this was a very sensationalized and abbreviated misquotation, and that the Soviet invasion occurred largely because of previous US failures to restrain Soviet influence. Huh? Zbigniew Brzezinski. Should we open that and say more about Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski? No, I guess I'll refer you to Peace Revolution episode 91. If you go to the show notes there, you can find a link there. I wonder if I still have it open. Yes, I do. Copy that. Come on. My computer is so slow today. And then there is Mr. Henry Kissinger and Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski together with Charlie Rose, together with Scowcroft. So there. It should be interesting enough to look at. Get some perspective from these people. Alright, moving on. According to Eric Alterman, writing in The Nation, Cyrus Vance, close aide Marshal Schulman, insists that the State Department worked hard to dissuade the Soviets from invading and would never have undertaken a program to encourage it, though he says he was unaware of the covert program at the time, indeed. Vance hardly seems to be represented at all in Gates' recounting. In September 79, Khalid Kaliquist, President Muhammad Taraki was assassinated in a coup within the PDPA, orchestrated by fellow Kalik members Hafzullah Amin or something like that, who assumed the presidency. Distrusted by the Soviets, Amin was executed by Soviet special forces in December 1979. A Soviet-organized government led by Parchami's Babrak Kamal, but inclusive of both factions, filled the vacuum. Soviet troops were deployed to stabilize Afghanistan under Karzai in more substantial numbers. Although the Soviet government did not expect to do most of the fighting in Afghanistan, as a result, however, the Soviets were now directly involved in what had been a domestic war in Afghanistan. Well, really, was it really a domestic war in Afghanistan? Because like I said, Islam and the Soviets, the communist way of thinking, don't go together. Doesn't seem like a civil war, like an internal thing here. At the time, some believed the Soviets were attempting to expand their borders southward. That's what it looks like to me, in order to gain a foothold in the Middle East. The Soviet Union had long had a dearth of warm water ports, and their movement south seemed to position them for further expansion toward Pakistan in the east and Iran to the west. American politicians, Republicans and Democrats alike, feared the Soviets were positioning themselves for a takeover of Middle Eastern oil. Others believed that the Soviet Union was afraid Iran's Islamic Revolution and Afghanistan's Islamization would spread to the millions of Muslims in the USSR. After the invasion, President Jimmy Carter announced what became known as the Carter Doctrine, that the US would not allow any other outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf. Yeah, all I remember about that from my youth is that on TV every day on the news it was about the Persian Gulf. He terminated the Soviet wheat deal in January 1980. Yeah, that ought to tell you something also, right? About the Cold War. It seems that throughout those years, the United States and Canada also were supplying Russia with food. How would you do that if it was your enemy? Does that make any sense? You know, seems like business is above war or something. No, Cold War is fake. It's meant as a control mechanism to keep people in fear, the submission to the government. Like a Gladio, for instance. Same thing, same idea, same principle. Operation Gladio, check it out. There are people, and with good arguments, I would suggest today that say, well, Gladio is still going on. So, where were we? Which was intended to establish trade with the USSR and lessen Cold War tensions. The grain exports had been beneficial to people employed in agriculture, and the Carter embargo marked the beginning of hardship for American farmers. That same year, Carter also made two of the most unpopular decisions of his entire presidency: prohibiting American athletes from participating in the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow, and reinstating registration for the draft of young males. Following the Soviet invasion, the United States supported diplomatic efforts to achieve a Soviet withdrawal. Now, something strange happened here in the Netherlands, and I don't know why, but somehow it was also a topic in the chat room a couple of days ago. Take a bite of this. The Dutch government has now decided that women as well as men should enter the military, right? But excuse me, the draft has been obliterated about 20 years ago or so. So why are you now talking about women and them having place in the army as men do, having an obligation, they call it, right? When there's no draft. Are they planning on reinstating a draft here? Or what's going on? Is this just stupid behavior by politicians that don't know what they're talking about? Right? Why would you obligate women to go into the army when there is no such thing as an obligation at this point to go into the army? Because that law was made null about 20 years ago. Nobody has to go into the army. Sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Well, has to do with equal treatment of men and women. So that's the reason why you come up with this law? Excuse me? Does that sound like a good excuse? Program, it continues. On the 3rd of July 1979, Carter signed a presidential finding authorizing funding. See, so that's what you want, what you want to see, right? Signed the presidential finding authorizing funding for anti-communist guerrillas in Afghanistan. And this again is from a book, Holy War Inc. Bergen, Peter, 2001, page 68. So, does he have primary sources for his claim in that book? Following the Soviet intervention of Afghanistan in December, Operation Storm 333, and the installation of more pro-Soviet President Karmai, Carter announced, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is the greatest threat to peace since the Second World War. President Reagan greatly expanded the program as part of the Reagan Doctrine of aiding anti-Soviet resistant movement abroad. To execute this policy, Reagan deployed CIA Specialist Activist Division paramilitary officers to equip the Mujahideen forces against the Soviet army. Right. So I'm very suspicious about all this. No matter how you look at it, it's a totalitarian way of controlling people, what's going on. Whether you call it communism, fascism, democracy, I don't fricking care, right? So, well, this is a fight against communism. So, one boss is fighting against another boss and the people beneath accept the other boss. It's inhumane. It defies logic. That's why I also suspect that this geopolitics is a bunch of rubbish, a bunch of nonsense, a play act. It seems to me that communism is very British. Yeah. Talk about New World Order, right? I think it's older than we think it is. I would suggest that this order, this world order even, is thousands of years old. Because of the links that can be made with structures, for instance, like pyramids, mythological stories that are too much alike to be ignored. Although the CIA was so, why did I say Britain seems communist, is also because Western companies from Britain and the United States and the Netherlands, like Shell, have helped build up Russia since 1916. That's all. That's 100 years ago. And it kept going at least till after the Second World War. Although the CIA and Texas Congressman Charlie, that is the Western help to the Soviet Union, has gone on after the Second World War. Although the CIA and Texas Congressman Charlie Wilson have received the most attention for their roles, the key architect of the strategy was Michael G. Vickers, a young CIA paramilitary officer working for the Gust Avrakotos. Avrakotos, whatever that is. He's working for Gust Avrakotos, whoever he is. The CIA's original head, who had a close relationship with Wilson, Vickers' strategy was to use a broad mix of weapons, tactics, logistics, along with training programs to enhance the rebels' ability to fight a guerrilla war against the Soviets. Reagan's program assisted in ending the Soviets' occupation in Afghanistan. A Pentagon senior official, Michael Pittsbury, successfully advocated providing Stinger missiles to the Afghan resistance, according to recent book and academic articles. Books and academic articles. So, yeah, interesting. Unnamed authority. Recent books and academic articles. If you mouse over, you get some ISBN number. Oxford University Press. Alright, so that's interesting. But even the universities are not on the first level of knowledge, I would suggest. They are second level. I found the argument in the word research pretty compelling. Why is it called research? As if it has already been done. Because of the re in front of it. I found it compelling because in Dutch we call it under search, if you would translate it literally. And so under search, yeah, something that comes from above, right? It comes from the first level of knowledge. Under search or research is the second level of knowledge. The program relied heavily on the Pakistan President Mohammed Zia-ul-Haq, who had a close relationship with Wilson. His Inter-Service Intelligence, ISI, was an intermediary for funds, distribution, passing of weapons, military training and financial support to Afghan resistance groups, along with funding from similar programs from British MI6 and SAS, Saudi Arabia and the People's Republic of China. The ISI armed and trained over 100,000 insurgents between 1978 and 1992. And the wiki says there is a citation needed for that. They encouraged the volunteers from the Arab states to join the Afghan resistance in its struggle against the Soviet troops based in Afghanistan. According to Peter Bergen, writing in Holy War Inc., no Americans trained or had direct contact with the Mujahideen. Alright, so one of the excuses, apparently, quote-unquote, excuses that were given to the Soviet soldiers for the invasion of Afghanistan was that they were protecting Afghanistan from Chinese and Western soldiers. However, when the independent filmmaker went to interview the Russian soldiers, they said that they had never seen Chinese or American soldiers. The skittish CIA had fewer than 10 operatives in the region because it feared it would be blamed, like in Guatemala. Civilian personnel from the U.S. Department of State and the CIA frequently visited the Afghan-Pakistan border area during this time, and the U.S. contributed generously to aiding Afghan refugees. And now we're bombing the hell out of the place there. The US built, by the way, the Dutch are also, I don't know, they probably voted on it already. I accidentally picked up some news bits while I was at work. They were already still bombing Iraq, which is of course outrageous. But they were also going to vote, and they probably already have, about aiding the United States in bombing Syria. So that's it's of course it's there's no words for the injustice that's going on here. The U.S. built Stinger anti-aircraft missiles supplied to the Mujahideen in very large numbers beginning in 1986, struck a decisive blow to the Soviet war effort as it allowed the lightly armed Afghanis to effectively defend against Soviet helicopter landings in strategic areas. The Stingers were so renowned and deadly that in 1990s the US conducted a buyback program to keep unused missiles from falling into the hands of anti-American terrorists. This program may have been covertly renewed following the US intervention in Afghanistan in late 2001. Yeah. It's also seen as a clue in regard to 9/11 research, because it seems that the time between the towers actually falling and the actual invasion in Afghanistan late 2001 seems to be a bit of a problem logistically speaking, and they seem to have been prepared for this invasion. Out of fear that remaining Stingers could be used against US forces in the country. Right, so that's in 2001. With US and other funding, the ISI armed and trained over 100,000 insurgents, and it says there's a citation needed for that. On 20 July 1987, the withdrawal of Soviet troops from the country was announced pursuant to the negotiations that led to Geneva Accords of 19 1988, with the last Soviet leaving on 15 February 1989. Soviet forces suffered over 14,000 killed and missing and over 50,000 wounded. Alright, hold on guys. Funding. The US offered 2 packages of economic assistance and military sales to support Pakistani's role in the war against the Soviet troops in Afghanistan. The first 6-year assistance package, 1981-1987, amounted to $3.2 billion, equally divided between economic assistance and military sales. The US also sold 40 F-16 aircraft to Pakistan during 1983-87 at a cost of $1.2 billion outside the assistance package. The second 6-year assistance package, 1987-1993, amounted to $4.2 billion. And this is to support Pakistan's role in the war against the Soviet troops in Afghanistan. Out of this, the $2.28 billion were allocated for economic assistance in the form of grants or loan that carried the interest rate of 2 to 3%. Alright, so this should be viewed in connection with poppies, of course. The rest of the allocation, $1.74 billion, was in the form of credit for military purchases. More than $20 billion in US funds were funneled into the country to train and arm the Afghan resistance groups. The program funding was increased yearly due to lobbying by prominent US politicians and government officials such as Charles Winston, Gordon Humphrey, Fred Eichel and William Casey under the Reagan administration. US support for the Afghan Mujahideen evolved into a centerpiece of US foreign policy called the Reagan Doctrine, in which the United States provided military and other support to anti-communist resistance movements in Afghanistan, Angola, Nicaragua and elsewhere. The Mujahideen benefited from expanded foreign military support from the United States, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and other Muslim nations. Saudi Arabia in particular agreed to match dollar to dollar the money the CIA was sending to the Mujahideen. When Saudi payments were late, Wilson and Avrakotos would fly to Saudi Arabia to persuade the monarchy to fulfill its commitments. Levels of support to the various Afghan factions varied. The ISI tended to favor vigorous Islamists like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar of Hizb Islami, something like that, and another guy, sorry guys, these names. Some Americans agreed, however. Others favored the relative moderates like Massoud. These included 2 Heritage Foundation foreign policy analysts, Michael Jones and James A. Phillips, both of whom championed Massoud as the Afghan resistance leader, most worthy of US support under the Reagan Doctrine. Aftermath. The US shifted in its interest from Afghanistan after the withdrawal of Soviet troops. American funding of Afghan resistance leader Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and his Hizb Islami party was cut off immediately. The US also reduced its assistance for Afghan refugees in Pakistan. In October 1919, United States President Bush referred to refused to certify that Pakistan did not possess a nuclear explosive device, triggering the imposition of sanctions against Pakistan under the Precier Amendment 1985 and the Foreign Assistance Act. This disrupted the second assistance package offered in 1987 and discontinued economic assistance and military sales to Pakistan, with the exception of the economic assistance already on its way to Pakistan. Military sales and training programs were abandoned, as well as some of the Pakistan military officers under training in the United States were asked to return home. As late as 1991, Charlie Wilson persuaded the House Intelligence Committee to give Mujahideen $200 million for fiscal year 1992, and the Saudi agreement to match dollar for dollar brought the budget to $400 million. Next heading, criticism. The United States government has been criticized for allowing Pakistan to channel a disappropriate amount of its funding to controversial Afghan resistance leader Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who Pakistan officials believed was their man. Hekmatyar has been criticized for killing other mujahideen and attacking civilian populations, including shelling Kabul with American-supplied weapons, causing 2,000 casualties. Hekmatyar was said to be friendly with Osama bin Laden, founder of Al-Qaeda, who was running an operation for assisting Afghan Arab volunteers fighting in Afghanistan called Maktab al-Qadamat. Alarmed by his behavior, Pakistan leader General Zia warned Hekmatyar it was Pakistan that made him an Afghan leader, and it's Pakistan who can equally destroy him if he continues to misbehave. In the late 1980s, Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, concerned about the growing strength of the Islamist movement, told Bush, "You are creating a Frankenstein." The US says that all of its funds went to native Afghan relatives and denies that any of its funds were used to supply Osama bin Laden or foreign Arab mujahideen. However, even a portion of those native Afghan rebels would form parts of the Taliban, fighting against the United States military. Well, there is no evidence that the CIA had direct contact with Osama bin Laden. Oh, is that so? Peter Bergen, January 2006, the Osama bin Laden. I know an oral history of Al-Qaeda's leader, Free Press, Peter Bergen. And Steve Coyle, Ghost Wars, The Secret History of the CIA, Afghanistan and bin Laden, with their ISBN number. While there is no evidence that the CIA had direct contact with Osama bin Laden, and US funding was directed to Afghan Mujahideen groups, critics of the US foreign policy consider Operation Cyclone to be substantially responsible for setting in motion the events that led to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and a view Brzezinski has dismissed. Yeah, well, I would dismiss it also. William Hartung argues that the early foundations of Al-Qaeda were built in part on relationships and weaponry that came from the billions of dollars in US support for the Afghan Mujahideen during the war to expel Soviet forces from the country. According to Christopher Andrew and... that's the end. Alright, thanks for listening everybody. Cap, Dan, Jeff, Jane, Joe, Jules, Lamperty, Matty, Tomato, and Vincent, and 3 Anons. Thanks for listening. See you guys next time.
inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific process.